everybody, Anna Sabramwoods here. A fabulous new week. Hope you're having a fabulous day. If you're here, say hi. If you have a question, please post it in the comments, and I definitely get to them after each of these live sessions. So today's session is going to be on a fabulous question that I get a lot is, when do I know that a scenario is actually the right fit? When do I know I should invest the time and, do all that forcing to get people to tell me all the awesomeness that needs to happen for me to actually have a really solid scenario? So when is it a good investment of my time and efforts and everybody else's efforts? But first, let me begin by telling you this. See if this resonates with you. So years back, and this is the danger of scenarios. Let me preamble this story. Danger of scenarios. So I was working with a team, and we developed several fabulous scenarios. And one of the things that we were doing is, when we were developing these scenarios, we were working with, I wasn't at that time working with the practitioners. I hadn't figured that step out yet. So what I was doing is I was working with people who were my subject matter experts. So when we were designing these scenarios, we said, hey, what are some problems or mistakes that people make on the job that are very, very costly? And there were some that were, let's say, in the hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of mistakes, right? And we were like, okay, that's pretty solid case to design a scenario because it helps us, save money for the company. And then we actually didn't get to work with a practitioner until we were testing this scenario. And then the practitioner said, oh yeah, this is awesome. It's so realistic. I mean, they had some nuances for us as far as the language that they use, because the manual uses one kind of language, but the people on the floor who are processing the orders used a different kind of language. So I was like, that's great. And then here's what I found out. They're like, yeah, I wish you, this was interesting, but I mean, this only happens maybe once a year. And I was like, ugh, once a year. There's no way that I would want to have somebody build a whole scenario around a mistake that happens once a year. That person is not going to remember it after they go through the training. They're not going to go probably through the scenario. In fact, they're not going to go through the scenario when they're in that moment. They're going to need a quick reference guide. So the thing that would have made a better impact and difference there would have been to actually just teach them how to access resources that are rare, that are for rare occurrences. So the problem with scenarios and the danger with scenarios, and that's why we have to do our due diligence and ask a lot of people about what's going on, because everybody's got an opinion and everybody's got a perception of what's the most important thing. And you have to always step back and say, what is the most important thing? And here are some criteria that I'm going to share with you. 6, I believe, yes. 6 criteria that are going to help you decide if this is the right investment. Because I felt like at that moment that I had wasted a lot of people's time and my own. Solid scenario, really good stuff, not useful, not helpful. That was a terrible, yet awesome, terrible lesson at that same time. And it is these moments that they don't define us, they just make us think twice. Like, I'm always going back to that saying, is this, because of that terrible lesson I had and also awesome lesson I had, I always say, okay, is this going to be worth the effort? Are we focusing on that lead domino? And when I say lead domino, I'm always looking for a behavior that we can either amp up, make it even better than it is, as in make people more efficient at doing something they're already doing well even better. Or if we solve this problem, kind of that one thing kind of methodology, if we tackle this one specific problem and we focus all of our efforts on it, will a lot of the other smaller or other problems disappear or become irrelevant because because this is that lead domino, the one that kind of trickles down to other places. So that's what I'm looking for with scenarios. But there's other criteria that help you decide, and so I'm going to walk through them right now. Now, as I'm walking through them, you might say, oh, that's interesting, but Anna, I'm using it this way. Pop it in the comments. Or also, if you have a specific question, you can always reach out to me, anna@annasabramowitz.com, or you can message me on LinkedIn. If you have a specific conundrum, I'd love to help you out with it, because this is what I love to do. All right. By the way, thanks so much for showing up. If you're having a good time, say hi. And also, if you find this is something that somebody could benefit from, do me a favor, please share it and spread the word, okay? Because more people should be doing scenarios, as far as I'm concerned, based on these criteria. Okay, so let's go. And also, I have no idea what's behind these cards because I've randomized the words, so it'll be like a surprise. Hope you like my magnet and reveal. Haha. All right, first one. Consequences are delayed. So if the consequences are delayed, what does that mean, delayed? Well, sometimes some people do tasks, and then the results of those tasks, it's not that they don't see them. It's that they're so far in the future that the person would have to do some active reflection and, reconstruction to say, hey, that happened over there? That's because I'm doing this over here. And a lot of us, when we're busy on the job doing a ton of stuff, learning new things, we don't take the time to do that. And you, through your scenarios, can actually compress that time and show people what happens immediately. So an example I love to go back to is, let's say you are working in a crafts shop or something, and there's a like cabinets up top, and you don't latch that piece properly, and there's like a piece there that doesn't get used very often. Maybe it gets used once every 6 months, but you don't latch it properly, and then 6 months later somebody opens it up and that machine falls on them and it really maims them. But you're no longer around to experience it, and therefore you don't get the lesson. That person who opened the thing got the lesson, right? Basically smushed them. But that's what I mean, is if the actions that you're taking are in some ways removed from that lesson. Like, I have a cigarette today, but, in 40 years, I'm having a surgery. Connection, right? You could smush that. You could make that connection a little faster for people. So you can do the compound effect, basically, in like the next action. You just say, 6 months later, look what happened. So those lessons are compressed for people. I hope that was clear. All right, another one. Ta-da! If the consequences are costly. Now, this one is kind of interesting, because a lot of people think when you say costly, it's things like materials, like, for you to mess up, like if you're going to train somebody in the kitchen, you don't want them to waste a whole bunch of food while they're testing out how to boil pasta or make sandwiches, whatever it is, right? So that's one kind of costly. Like if you're designing if you see a process where the waste is costing the company a lot of money, and through practice, some of that waste could be eliminated. I'm not saying that anybody could actually ever learn to make a sandwich through a computer screen. That would be amazing and impossible right now. But in order to, let's say, one of the examples that I cite is a fabulous one from Michael Allen, where he had people practice on a grill, putting things on the grill as orders came in. Because one of the things to become a great chef is to know when things are supposed to go on and how long they take. I don't know if you've ever been in let's say a kitchen with somebody who's a novice, but they start everything at the same time, and then some things are cold, some things are burned, some things are undercooked, because they don't know that sequence. So imagine if you could help somebody practice that sequence initially without even touching real food, but getting familiar with the locations of where to place the food, how to manage those orders. That's like probably 30% of your food wastage right there is reduced, because somebody gets into the pattern of how to plan for incoming orders, right? So that's pretty sweet. Now another one, when you say costly, it could be reputation. It could be, I don't know how many times I've ever walked into a store and somebody is completely not comfortable dealing with customers. They have no idea what they're doing. They got that trainee tag and you're supposed to give them like all kinds of leeway. But if that person is unsupported at that point, or something goes wrong, it's still my opinion about how that place supports their staff to support me, because in the end that's a reflection of how much that business cares about me, right? So if it's all trainees and none of them have support and I get poor service, I still think about that. So I don't need the trainee tag there. I still think about you're putting people who are not capable of serving me effectively to serve me. And a lot of companies do this. Instead, they could actually have scenarios where somebody gets to practice dealing with a customer, answering the most common questions so they're not flustered, or they have some things on automation so that they can quickly answer those things. And that's one of the things that I think call centers do really, really well, is there's a drill. And there's a lot of building of tasks before you get to complexity. And they can actually also structure who comes your way, right? If you have simple inquiries, you get to go to this new person and they can confidently answer questions and get their confidence. In a store, you don't get that. You don't get to filter. You just, whoever comes in next, you're tackling. So that's probably one of the most critical places to use scenarios, because as you probably know, a person who has a bad experience, has a good experience, tells their friends, maybe 2 people. A person who has a bad experience tells 10. Now, I came across that adage when I was before Twitter and before like Instagram and social media was the bomb, right? So now it's probably like, if you're pissed off, you tell 1,000 followers. So that's very, very, very important right now. And I think a lot of places are undervaluing this opportunity to really upskill people before they interact with the public. So this is huge. Reputation is huge, right? Okay. Another one. Contentious. Ooh, what's contentious mean? Consequences are contentious. So, we've got a lot of things going on in a workplace, right? That can be contentious. Like, how do we deal with somebody who steals? How do we deal with somebody who's late? How do we deal with somebody who maybe came up with a new way of doing things, but we don't all agree if that's the right thing because we've never come up with a rule with it? How do we deal with people who use social media and work at our place? Like, there's a lot of things to discuss, right? What is considered harassment? What is considered appropriate? What is considered, what's okay? When is it okay to hug a person? When is it okay to give them a card? All kinds of things are coming up, right? So what a scenario allows you to do is to explore those topics that initially would probably make people, if you put them all in a group, there would be like probably 4 or 5 people dominating that conversation. You know who they are, maybe 2. And then the rest of everybody would just sit around and, watch the show. So what you can do is have everybody think about the idea, the situations. And in a scenario, it's good to actually have some consequences that are legit for that person, for that character. Because what that does is, because you're not leaving it absolutely ambiguous, regardless of whether it's right or wrong, now people have something to critique and comment on. You don't want to just leave it open and have people will still come up with their own ideas, but it's good to provide them with something to discuss. So that's a fabulous place. So if it's contentious, a scenario is a great way for everybody to consider before, let's say, they come to a room or before they share their ideas, because they've had a chance to think about it without being basically told what to think or told what to believe. They make that decision on their own in a safe place. They can explore alternatives also, which is wonderful, in a safe place. And when I say safe, I don't mean like your consequences are vanilla. No, in fact, your consequences should be over the top, because then they're not impactful in any way. But what happens is that I'm able to choose what I think is right without having somebody over my shoulder telling me what they think is right or what I should choose. There's no shoulds in there, which is wonderful. You can actually just leave it open to what I think this person should do on their behalf in my character world without any judgment, right? So it's a pretty cool space to explore radical ideas. And then have people come together and discuss they'd be like, those options were ridiculous. And you're like, oh, really? Why not? Why were they ridiculous? Some people thought they were very, very reasonable. Oh, this is a great place to start a conversation, because all those things that have been underneath the surface now bubble to the top, and you can actually address them openly. That's the best. Clear, transparent, awesome, open communication. That's the best. Okay. Removed. Oh, did I say delayed? Removed. Okay. So removed, they're removed from the consequences. So this is kind of like delayed, or you know how I mentioned, let's say you're lashing something, and like 6 months later it's not lashed properly, it falls on somebody and it hurts them. So that's delayed consequences. Removed is when you're actually, let's say you have a workforce that rotates or is seasonal, right? Well, a lot of times what somebody does in the first quarter will affect people in the fourth quarter, right? But if it's a rotating workforce, or you have a lot of people, you could save money by having people up front do the right thing. Like, let's say the day crew does something that the night crew actually has to fix, and they don't ever communicate, or it's a pain in the butt. If we just up front said, if you just do this, you actually move these things up to the front facing this way, the night crew will actually get to be more efficient. So that's a great thing to kind of figure out, observe, and be like, wow, look, I can make this place more efficient if these people who don't know what these people actually do because they're removed from each other could actually work together and realize that they are having a positive impact or a negative impact depending on how they do these actions or how they interact with these things. And even things like, the people who, and I would say, let's say there's a process, like let's say somebody's activating their card, right, for a credit card. And if the person in the very beginning is able to, let's say, capture a whole bunch of information, and then when they transfer the call, pass that information on to the next person, let's say the next person has a way better chance of having a positive experience with that customer, because the customer is already less frustrated because they don't have to give their information again and all that other stuff, and maybe there's some continuation there. So this person would never know that this person is having a bad experience because let's say there's 100 people passing off calls. But if we can show them that, then there's it's not necessarily a super positive impact on this person up here, but there's a greater unity and love across all those departments because they realize how the actions of one affect another, right? Which is a really good thing to do. All right, removing those silos. Okay, sensitive. So this is a little bit different than contentious. For me, there are topics that people will not discuss in public. They're just not comfortable discussing at meetings, and also they're not comfortable voicing their opinions about how they would address a certain issue that is sensitive. So to be able to have somebody explore things that are sensitive, and also for some other people to explore topics that they didn't know were sensitive, but now they see through the consequences that they actually are very sensitive topics, you create a really solid scenario and expose all those people to not only the situation, but different ways of approaching it and the consequences that happen as a result. So it's a great way to build empathy, I think. But also for you later, you could even gather anonymous data about how people addressed it, which gives you a litmus test as to what's going on at the company. If most people say, you see Jim and Bob, and Jim's really being, like, let's say, rude to Bob, what would you do? What should Jim do? And if the number one thing that Jim should do is shut up and go back to his desk, that tells you something about the culture and maybe the things you're reinforcing with, like, your HR department, or conversations, communications between people who are manager and employee, right? Like, what are those, what's our company culture right now, and where are some places we can make adjustments? So it's a great little litmus test that you could do. And then also the other thing you can do with this one and the contentious one is use the scenario as as the pre-work that people get a chance to think about, percolate about it, and then bring them into a live session so that they can really discuss it and they've had a chance to formulate some ideas, ask them some questions. Because one of the dangers when you run a live session for anything, especially when things are emotionally charged or a little bit more complex, is that some people are great about thinking on their feet. And you know this. Some people, like I'm one of those, maybe sometimes, it depends on the topic. Sometimes when I talk, because everything is now focused and coming out of like just a single stream, I'm actually able to think through things, and it helps me come up with ideas and it helps me solve problems. But some people don't work like that. Some people need to reflect and think deeply. And in a place where there's the talkers and then there's the people who are reflecting and thinking and all kinds of stuff, it's hard to have everybody on the same page and have everybody get the same value out of those interactions. So if you let the talkers and the thinkers and the reflectors and all kinds of people experience those things beforehand, prepare with some questions or some situations that they should be ready to discuss, that's, I think, a better setup and more conducive to everybody having an equal contribution, if that's what you're looking for. All right, one more left. Oh my gosh. Are you excited? What is it? Let's see if you can guess. Ooh, context specific. All right. So there are some decisions, right? And one of the things that we're trying to teach people with our scenarios is decision making, right? What do you do when this happens? How do you approach this problem? Why, right? Here's what happened. What happened? Why? Why did it happen, right? You're teaching people not only how to think, but then also to recognize context in which situations that trigger certain kinds of thinking, decision-making behavior, right? And so what happens is, what's kind of interesting is that in many organizations, the procedures are kind of, there's the standard operating procedures, and then there's the deviations depending on which situation you're in. So what's kind of cool is that you can show the difference between executing, let's say, you set up a situation that's in one context, and okay, what would be the process you follow? And then you show another situation with a different context. And so what happens is that helps people think about the fact that there are variables that are going to lead to different decisions. And regardless of what the procedures say, which still need to be followed, I need to apply an extra level of thinking, discretion, evaluation to be able to make a good decision here, because this isn't just straight up like this. I actually have to consider the context in which these are being applied. And so what you can do is you can share that. Also, the other thing you can do is create a scenario where there is a very specific context and you're sharing that and people know that, and you show the consequences of that, and then bring them in and say, okay, see what happened there? Now, what if we had this context? What would be different? And sometimes there is differences and sometimes there isn't, but you want people to know those nuances, because that's what makes great decision makers, right? They know the difference between when to apply, when not to apply, and what, in essence, when people practice enough through scenarios, they're not necessarily going to become super better at decision making. Like, that would take some serious time. Let's be realistic. That takes time. We can't solve that in 15 minutes. However, what we can do is help people recognize that there are certain cues in their environment, there are certain factors that they should get better at recognizing to help them make better decisions, and then you should have some kick-ass resources to support them in learning what those things are. So the scenario is always a good way to kind of get those light bulbs going, saying, hey, that didn't work out exactly the way it planned, but I followed the procedures. I wonder what happened there. So yes, so thanks for sticking by with this. Hope you found it useful. Let's do a quick little recap just for fun, because we love recaps because they help you remember, I guess. All right, so when to use a scenario. When is it a good investment? And This is not an exhaustive list. I have I could come up with 24 more, but I thought this was good. And also, there are other considerations like how often does the mistake happen, how costly it is, all those things, right? This is, if you could think about this, I'm going into the tactical level of scenarios, and there's still the strategic level of scenarios, which we could talk about in a different live, all right? So this is the tactical level. So at the tactical level, you want to use a scenario if your consequences are delayed, if they are contentious, there's some discussion around them, if the person is removed from experiencing them in the real world, if they're costly, whether it's materials, reputation, or something else, if the topic is sensitive and people need to digest it on their own, or you want them to, and if the procedures or the process changes depending on context. So, questions, ideas, how are you using scenarios? Any lessons learned, anything that you found valuable, let me know. I will go back and review the comments, and if you have any questions that you don't want to share in the comments, then just message me via LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube, whatever you want. And it's Anna@annasabramowitz.com. And and if you found this useful, share it with the world. All right, you guys have a wonderful rest of the week. I'll see you here tomorrow for another one of these awesome live sessions. All right, take care. Bye.